you just can't do it the same way you can a skill. Okay. I mean, a skill. And so the back of the envelope, the quick back of the envelope test on whether or not it's a skill or an attribute, because they get conflated all the time, is can it be taught or can I teach it? Okay. If the answer is no, then it's probably an attribute, not a skill. Okay. And the reason, yeah. If you, for example, said, hey, Rich, I'm inherently impatient. Okay. And I want to work on my patience. I would say, okay, Erica, but I can't sit down and give you a class on patience or how to be more patient. Okay. What you have to do to develop an attribute, it has to be self-motivated, it has to be self-directed, and then it's going to take a deliberate choice by you to step into discomfort, uncertainty in environments that test that attribute. So you would, for example, have to go find environments that test your patience. All right,
That's
and then choose to develop and pick the attribute, whether it's adaptability, whether it's self-efficacy, whether it's discipline. If you want to develop attribute, it has to be self-directed, and you have to choose to step into it and probably go against some of the preconditioning you have because you're a little lower on the scale.
My guest today is former Navy SEAL Commander Rich Diviney. In a career spanning more than 20 years, he completed more than 13 overseas deployments. As the officer in charge of training for a specialized command, Diviney spearheaded the creation of a directorate that was fused with physical, mental, and emotional disciplines. He led his small team to create the first ever mind game that helped special operators train their brains to perform faster, longer, and better in all environments, especially high-stress ones. Since his retirement in early 2017, Diviney has worked as a speaker, facilitator, and a consultant with the Chapman & Co. Leadership Institute and Assignment Cynic Incorporated. He's taught leadership and optimal performance to more than 5,000 business, athlete, and military leaders from organizations such as American Airlines, the San Francisco 49ers, and Zoom. Also, Rich just released his newest book, The Attributes, 25 Hidden Drivers for Optimal Performance, where he explores a very clear difference between the attributes and skills. Do you have what it takes to succeed any situation? According to retired commander, true optimal performance goes beyond just skill. It's all about the attributes. All right. Well, Rich, I am so honored to have you on. First of all, of course, I always like to say thank you for your service, for your dedication, for so many years of your life serving our country with honor and respect. Can't go without recognizing that first and foremost. And then also thank you for making the time to join me today on this podcast to serve others more today. It means so much.
Well, thank you, Erica. It's a pleasure to be here and an honor. And yeah, I appreciate your appreciation, as do all servicemen and women. So thank you.
Absolutely. Well, let's kind of take it a little back. So you being a former SEAL, Navy SEAL for about 25 years, am I correct?
Just over 20, so just under 21 years. Yeah.
Okay. Well, still, that's quite a bit. So I know that a man that goes into the SEALs doesn't come out the same. So I would love if you could kind of tell us how the Navy SEALs kind of shaped you into the man you are today, and a little tidbit of what that did to you, being in service.
Sure. Well, yeah, the hope is that you don't change too much. I think in instead of saying change, I'll say you learn things about yourself that you didn't know maybe existed. And that's really I think the most powerful thing about something like SEAL team life and really SEAL training in general. I mean, basic SEAL training, which is San Diego, and people don't, people out in LA and San Diego know how cold the water is out there, but people, I think everybody else in the country assumes that the water is nice and warm out in Southern California, but it's not, especially in the wintertime. But so there's a lot of cold water, and BUDS, which is basic underwater demolition / SEAL training, is conducted out there in Coronado, and that's a 6-month course, and that's really the crucible through which guys go to become SEALs, and that's where you have the attrition rates of about 85%, and I would say that, when people ask me what is the one biggest takeaway I got out of going through that, and of course going through a career in the teams, is is really, I think I recognized and realized what true confidence is. And I came out with true confidence. And what true confidence is, to me at least, is the ability to know that regardless of how much an environment or situation deteriorates around me, I know I'll be able to perform through it. I have what it takes to get through. And that's what you come out of basic SEAL training with. That you come out with that confidence. And of course, as you go through SEAL life, and especially kind of through the kinetic time frame that I was a SEAL, and combat and things like that, it just gets forged in you. So I think true confidence is really the number one thing that I learned and came out of this whole lifestyle with.
That's amazing. Well, I think that is such a valuable thing to come out with, because life will always throw us curveballs. We've witnessed this over the last year, and we'll go into this. So that's a very valuable asset to take with you from SEAL training. And I know some SEALs personally, and I listen to David Goggins all the time. Mark Devine's been on my podcast. So I really, really respect the mental aspect that comes out of the SEAL training, which you kind of touched on a little bit. So I'm curious, when the mental aspects, I would love if you could talk about that. So I know the process, of course, Hell Week, and what Hell Week is supposed to do. It's supposed to basically strip you down to nothing. Doesn't matter how physically strong you are, what skills you have. It strips everybody down to nothing. And then basically you're utilizing that mental game that you have to get you to, through Hell Week. So if you could touch onto that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's really the key, because again, the primary purpose of SEAL training in general, and then any training you do after something like BUDS, is to prepare you for uncertainty. And I always joke that, in SEAL training and in Hell Week, you spend hundreds of hours carrying boats on your head. You spend hundreds of hours exercising with 300-pound telephone poles and things like that. And over the course of my almost 21 years, I did hundreds of combat missions, and I did thousands of training evolutions, and never on one of them did I carry a boat on my head or a 300-pound telephone pole on my shoulder. And so what that told me was that those exercises weren't training us how to be Navy SEALs. So there's a difference between how to do the job and whether or not you can do the job. It was really those exercises were seeing if you can do the job, and the can do the job speaks to both attributes and this kind of mental toughness. It's been defined by so many different people as what it is, right? Mental fortitude, mental toughness, mental strength, the mental game. I mean, whatever it is, the process by which one can actually move through and step through challenge, uncertainty, and stress. And I think those types of things are very specific, and it starts with this idea of courage. And I know courage is one of the attributes I talk about, but courage is really fascinating because there cannot be courage without the presence of fear. Fear shows up in our systems. It tickles our amygdala response, and we start moving into this fight-flight choice. And whether or not we choose to fight or flight is a separate circuit in the brain. And when we choose to fight, which is really ultimately step into our fear, it doesn't mean put up your dukes and fight, but we choose to move into our fear and keep going, we are rewarded. It's a courage switch is switched in our brain, and we're rewarded with dopamine. So we get a dopamine reward by stepping into our fear. So this is it's a common misperception that the dopamine reward comes after the goal accomplishment, which some does, but most of it comes every single step we take. And so when we decide to move into something that's frightening us or making us anxious, we get this reward. And so I think part of the mental process is to understand the reframing of what fear, stress, and anxiety actually is. Fear, stress, and anxiety is designed evolutionarily to get us moving, to get us to do something. When we're hungry, we become agitated and stressful and anxious. That's designed to get us to go and look for food. When we're lonely or depressed, we become agitated and stressed out, right? And that's designed to get us to go find companionship. So these are by design. And then, of course, as a human species, we're designed to kind of move and explore. It's really what's taken us from cave dwellers to space explorers. This urge to kind of seek and explore the unknown. And so if we start to understand that challenge, stress, and uncertainty is there for a reason, and we're designed to actually step into it, it becomes a reframing process that makes it a little bit easier to actually kind of move forward, and we get rewarded in the process.
Yeah, and it's total perspective shift of utilizing those. For example, failures per se is switching your mindset on what a failure is. It's actually there to help us grow.
Yeah.
And the only way we could succeed is by stepping into these fears and failures and everything. So, of course, it makes total sense. So, I know a lot of our conversation is going to revolve around your book because there's so much value in that. What is the exact name of your book? I don't want to say, I want to put the full title.
Yeah, it's called The Attributes, and the subtitle is 25 Hidden Drivers of Optimal Performance.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I know that part of when you were in the SEALs, you were put to this task to observe these attributes that SEALs use in combat and what are their strengths in those attributes. So can you kind of walk us through the process of how you learned all these attributes?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, I was in charge of a special. I was in charge of selection, assessment, and training for one of our very specialized SEAL commands. So it wasn't the basic SEAL training; it was one of our very specialized one. And at this particular command, we would take very experienced SEALs and come up and bring them to our command, and then they go through our own 9 month selection process, and we get about a 50% attrition rate, which is okay. The problem was we weren't effectively explaining why guys were failing and succeeding, and all we had usually were skills-based criteria. Well, this guy couldn't shoot very well, this guy couldn't skydive very well, whatever that is. But it didn't make sense to us because these were guys who were really experienced SEALs already coming to our process. So it was leaving us dissatisfied. It was leaving the leadership dissatisfied, and it was especially leaving the candidate dissatisfied because the candidate would be like, well, what the hell does that mean, right? And so I took over, and I was kind of asked by my CEO to kind of look more deeply. And that's when I kind of went back to our roots and said, okay, what are we actually looking for? And I kind of thought about the logs that we carry in buds and the boats we carry on our heads. And I said, we're looking really for a set of innate qualities that tell us whether or not these individuals have what it takes to operate at our command. And we set about well, first I had to distinguish the difference. And so the difference is that skills are not inherent to our nature. Skills are learned. And none of us are born with the ability to throw a ball or ride a bike or drive a car. We can be taught those, and we can sit down and learn them, and then they, excuse me, they direct our behavior in known specific environments. So here's how and when to drive a car or throw a ball or ride a bike, and because they're kind of visible that way and kind of tangible, they're very easy to assess, measure, and test. You can see how well anybody does any one of those things. It's why when you're in hiring processes or selection processes, we're so often seduced by skills because they're the stats, right? They're the numbers you can read, they're the quantifiables. The problem with skills is that they don't tell us how people are going to operate in uncertainty, challenge, and stress, because it's very difficult, if not impossible, to apply a known skill to an unknown environment, right? So this is where we begin to lean on attributes. Attributes, on the other hand, are innate. They're inherent. Okay, all of us are born with levels of adaptability, of patience, of resilience. We can see these things in small children. Okay, now certainly they develop over time, but they're already inside of us. They inform our behavior rather than direct it. So in other words, our levels of resilience and adaptability and perseverance informed the way we showed up when we were learning how to ride a bike and we were falling off a dozen times. Okay. And then finally, because they're running in the background, they're hidden, they're very difficult to assess, measure, and test. You and I can't sit across the table from someone else and assess their patience, or assess their adaptability in just a kind of a one-on-one. They are the most easily seen, visible, and visceral in times of stress, challenge, and uncertainty. That's when the true us, right, comes out, and we start seeing these things show up. This is why the SEAL training that I was running and then the basic SEAL training was such great laboratories inside of which I could study these. But so we start translating that to our everyday life, and especially life of our everyday lives are wrought with uncertainty, right? Hopefully we're not too much, but look at 2020 for all of us. I mean, for God's sake,
example.
I mean, yeah, biggest example, and so we were all thrown into stress, challenge, and uncertainty pretty much overnight, and all of us, I would maintain, got a crash course in these attributes, because none of us, at least in the first few days or even few weeks or even few months for some, had skills with which we could use to deal with it. We were all kind of just figuring it out. So we were leaning on things like patience and adaptability and resilience. So the book kind of takes the attributes and talks about what they are and how they work in terms of kind of optimal performance. And then I've binned them into categories. So what are the attributes that make up grit? What are the attributes that make up mental acuity? Drive, leadership, and team ability.
Yeah. Is it the first time it's been observed when you were put in this position for the SEALs? Was that the first time it was looked at, like question, like why are certain people making it and certain people are not?
It was the first time we had. It was the first time we had articulated it enough to make a really valuable observation, I should say. It's
Mm.
funny. I was just talking to a friend of mine actually this morning, and we're talking about executive searches and and people looking for hires, and we were kind of lamenting and kind of joking that everybody knows what attributes are, but no one really has. We don't really know. No one really talks about them. We're always looking for,
No.
skills are just, oh, that person's a great graphic designer. That's the best salesperson. Let's bring them. Oh yeah, of course we want someone who fits in the team. Of course we want someone who can rise up and show up when things are tough, right? But we don't. So we all want them. We all know they're there. But that's why I call them hidden drivers, because we all know they're there. They're all inside of us, and they're all expressing themselves all the time. But I'm just someone who loves to try to articulate this stuff in a way that's tangible.
Yeah. And I think that's really fascinating. Sometimes, probably for the SEAL training, you would say this like, oh, he just didn't have it. Like, he just wasn't able to do it. He wasn't, he just quit.
Right.
But there's a lot more depth underlying that. And what would be the common reason, or actually, what is the commonality for a SEAL persevering and going, like making it past Hell Week? And what would be a common attribute that all SEALs have to obtain to make it
Yeah.
through? What would be the,
Yeah, it's a great question, and one I've thought about a lot, and the guys who still run SEAL training are thinking about, because I don't know if we've fully answered it. However, let me start with this. We all have all of the attributes. Okay, so all of us have every one. The difference in each one of us are the levels to which we have each. So, for example, I would say every SEAL that makes it through SEAL training has a predominance of all of the grit attributes, because you have to. So we have high levels of all the grit attributes.
mm-hmm.
So really, someone who doesn't make it through, they still have the grit attributes. They still have courage. They still have adaptability. They still have perseverance, and they still have resilience. They just didn't have it levels that are high enough to get them through that specific endeavor, right? And that's a pretty extreme endeavor, by the way. So I mean, there's no there's no judgment there whatsoever. So it's really about and I always like to say it's kind of about lifting our own hood. Again, we're in this time where we have to really honor and remember kind of this idea of unity. We're all together. We're all human, and I think that's really important. But we also have to remember that we're all unique in certain ways. So I would kind of give the automobile analogy, right? We're all automobiles, but some of us are Jeeps, and some of us are Ferraris, and some of us are SUVs. And there's no judgment there, right? Because the Jeep can do things the Ferrari can't do, and the Ferrari can do things the Jeep can't do. The key is, can you lift your own hood and figure out what's your engine and what's your automobile? Because you may, in fact, be a Jeep that's trying to run on a Ferrari track, or you might be a Ferrari that's trying to run on a Jeep track. So understanding these elemental things about us allow us to understand ourselves in a way so we can actually say, okay, am I actually on the right track? And if so, great. If not, let me shift. Or if not, if I want to run on a track that's not necessarily a great fit for my specific vehicle, then which are the attributes that I need to kind of actively develop so I can run on that track? Because we can do what we want with free will allows us to do that. So that's that. Or if we find, hey, yeah, actually I'm running on the right track, now we know actually what we can actually tack onto our engine to perform better. Because and you know this, there are so many great tips out there, techniques, tips, hacks, things to help people perform better. But not every tip works for every person, right? And so understanding your own unique engine allows you to understand if this particular tip, if for example you're trying to put a nitrous oxide pack on the Jeep engine, you might blow the engine, right? And if you're trying to put big tires on the Ferrari, that might not be the best choice. So you can kind of start to discriminate which tips and techniques and tricks work for you and your specific engine. But we have to understand our engine first.
And how do we get to understand our engine? What's the best process? I mean, well, I'm curious because you mentioned that skills are developed, and it sounds like attributes as well can be developed. Like we all have every single attribute, but some of us have certain strengths and whatnot. But if they're not learnable, how do we develop them? Like, for example, looking under a hood, what are we lacking in this attribute, and how do we strengthen it?
Yeah, they absolutely are developable. Developable. developable.
Developable.
Yeah, whatever that is. So you can develop them. How about that? Yeah. You just can't do it the same way you can a skill. Okay. I mean, a skill. And so the back of the envelope, the quick back of the envelope test on whether or not it's a skill or an attribute, because they get conflated all the time, is can it be taught or can I teach it? Okay. If the answer is no, then it's probably an attribute, not a skill. Okay. And the reason is, like, I can sit down. If you, for example, said, hey, Rich, I'm inherently impatient. Okay. And I want to work on my patience. I would say, okay, Erica, but I can't sit down and give you a class on patience or how to be more patient. Okay. What you have to do to develop an attribute, it has to be self-motivated, has to be self-directed, and then it's going to take a deliberate choice by you to step into discomfort, uncertainty in environments that test that attribute. So you would, for example, have to go find environments that test your patience. All right, and then choose to develop and pick the attribute, whether it's adaptability, whether it's self-efficacy, whether it's discipline. If you want to develop attribute, it has to be self-directed, and you have to choose to step into it and probably go against some of the preconditioning you have because you're a little lower on the scale.
Oh, that's so interesting. So would you say that 2020 would be a good example or a good time to reflect on what strengths we had and possibly the attributes we were, using most at the time to handle this uncertain time?
Absolutely. In fact, we can all look at 2020 as a gift in that case because we can all look at it and say, okay, when I autopsy my performance, what was I good at and what wasn't I good at? So let's just take adaptability, for example. All of us had to be adaptable, all of us. So those of us who were higher automatically on adaptability scales, we're kind of like, all right, we're more go with the flow people. And we're kind of like that way in most of our lives. When the environment changes around us in a way we cannot control, which is adaptability, can we shift and mold and shape ourselves to that environment? And those people who do that more easily are likely higher on the adaptability scale. There are those people who they don't like it one bit and they go kicking and screaming and it's tough for them. Those people still have adaptability because humans are adaptable, but it's just tougher for them. They're lower on the scale. So someone could look back and say, okay, how easily did I adapt to the new environment? These virtual meetings, the staying at home, the teaching, your kids school now that they're not in school, the managing, the balancing, all that stuff. How easily did I adapt, or was it difficult? If it was more difficult, then you might be a little lower. So it's a great opportunity to kind of look back and start to deconstruct some of your own engine.
Absolutely. I remember talking to somebody and she mentioned that 2020 either made us or broke us. And it's true. It's like you actually get to see how you handled things, and it's a good time to self-assess. And you also talk about, let's go into, you kind of tapped on it briefly, but the 5 umbrellas of attributes, or the 5 umbrellas that you outlined in your book. What were those again? If you could just break them down. And I know one of those is leadership, and I'm going to pull out that one specifically because I want to know what the core attributes of leadership are. And I'll ask more questions regarding that, but
okay. Let me give you I'll give you the overall, and then we can come back to leadership. So the first category is grit. So what are the attributes that make up grit? Grit is not just a singular thing. A lot of people talk about grit as an attribute, but as I thought about it, I was like, no, it's not just one thing. And in fact, Angela Duckworth wrote a great book called Grit, and she says basically the same thing. It's a combination of stuff. So I just like to figure out, okay, what are those elemental things? So the grit attributes talk about, okay, what is it and what is grit? Grit I would kind of describe as this ability to kind of push through and kind of fight through, push through, persevere through and a lot of times it could be like kind of shorter term. If we start talking longer term, we get into the drive attributes, but kind of this ability to power through, push through when things are really tough, really scary, really anxious. And then of course, resiliency is in there. So can we rebound? Because the only way you can continually push through is if you actually are able to rebound and recover effectively. Otherwise, you entropy and eventually, I guess, croak. But so that's grit. Mental acuity. Mental acuity really speaks to how the brain functions and processes our world. Okay, and those are 4 attributes: situational awareness, compartmentalization, task switching, and then learnability. And so how do we effectively take in all of the 11 million bits of information that are coming into our 5 senses at every second, right? How do we take that in? What do we choose to focus on? Inside of that, based on our objective, can we prioritize and assess and then focus, which is compartmentalization? While we're moving through our world, can we effectively task switch? So none of us can multitask. It's somewhat of a myth. Neuroscientists will tell you that you can focus on one thing and you can have like a little bit of a secondary focus on something else. But you can't. Your brain is going to be focused on one thing at a time. Now, some people, just to level the bubble here, will say, wait a second, I can drive my car and listen to a podcast, and that's great. It doesn't count if you've relegated those tasks to the unconscious mind, right? So the reason why you can pay attention to a podcast while you're driving a car is because you're not having to think about driving that car. However, I guarantee you that if you're driving your car and listening to a podcast and suddenly someone swerves in front of you and you have to hit the brakes and swerve yourself, you just missed 15 seconds of that podcast, right? Because your brain just switched to the focusing on driving. So that's task switching. How effectively can you move in between these contexts and categories inside of life? And then learnability. Inside of all of that, how fast and rapidly can we absorb all this stuff, integrate it into our hippocampus, and then use it again? So that's mental acuity. Drive speaks to kind of this long-term goal and objective activity. Okay, can we, the ability to kind of set these long-term goals and then understand and move through everything that's required to get and achieve those things. And there are 5 in there, and those are self-efficacy, discipline, open-mindedness, cunning, and narcissism. And I know that's pejorative. We can get into that if we want to. And then, of course, there's leadership. What are the attributes that make up great leaders? And then what are the attributes that make up great team ability, which is our ability to kind of be on and operate with other people.
Okay, so talking about, I don't know why I pulled out leadership specifically because there's so many great ones, but leadership, I know you mentioned that leadership is determined by another, not by ourselves. Like we aren't just like, oh, okay, we're a leader. So, okay, if you could talk into that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is something I realized. I mean, I realized, and I kind of studied more leadership as I got out of the military, ironically, even though I was an officer in the military. So I was always in charge of something, okay? But there's a distinct difference between being in charge and leadership, right? One is a noun and one is a verb, okay? And like I say, we don't get to self-designate. We don't get to call ourselves leaders. It's like calling ourselves good-looking or funny, right? That's what other people get to decide that, not us. Because leadership is a behavior. It's not a position, and it's our behaviors. It's the way we act towards other people that allow another person to decide, hey, that is someone who I consider a leader. That is someone I will follow. I always say, beware of the person who comes up and says, "I am your leader," because it's not going to work that way, right? You can't dictate that to someone unless you're you are a dictator, right? So so these attributes speak to the behaviors that one exhibits that allow others to consider people leaders. And so one of the ways I kind of was able to deconstruct this was, after getting out of the Navy, I did a lot of work with an organization called Chapman & Co., Bob Chapman in St. Louis, and a good friend of mine, Simon Sinek, who wrote the book Start With Why. So I was in this leadership space, and whenever we were teaching about leadership, we'd ask the crowd, hey, what do great leaders do? We just throw that question out to the crowd. And a lot of times we'd have a whiteboard and we just start writing down the answers that come back to us. And so we'd come up with like a list of like 25 or 30 things. And by the way, every single list was always the same. It was always pretty much the same stuff. Okay. Whether it was, in the US, whether it was outside the US, whether it was millennials, whether it was Gen Xers, whatever, didn't matter. It was always the same thing. So we intuitively know what great leaders do. And in terms of behaviors, all 5 of these behaviors were always there. And those behaviors are empathy, selflessness, authenticity, decisiveness, and accountability. Those were always on the list of what makes people say that person is a great leader. And so that's kind of how I deciphered it. And oh, by the way, team ability is the same thing. You don't get to call yourself a great teammate. Other people call you a great teammate. And those are also behaviors.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, it seems obvious when you state those 5 too.
Yeah,
that's definitely what a leader has.
Right. Well, it's funny because we say think of someone in your life who you consider a great leader, and it doesn't have to be professional. It can be personal. Whether it's a parent, a mentor, a boss, whatever. And as soon as someone puts that person in their head, these attributes start to show up. Why? Why do you think that way? These things. They behave this way.
And I think it's good for somebody that wants to be a leader. in some way, shape, or form, they should look at these attributes. Like, do I like check off the box? Do I have empathy? Am I authentic? I
Yeah.
think it's a good way to assess yourself
Yes.
if that's what you choose to be in your life. And then the other thing you talk about is the difference between self-discipline and discipline. So
Mhm.
what does that mean?
Yeah, that was a fun one for me to write because I had to really do some self reflection and introspection
Mm.
because I recognized when I was talking about discipline, I was talking about it in terms of the ability to kind of set and achieve long term goals. And what I realized in kind of my introspection is that I am someone who has done that my whole life. I've been able to set pretty audacious goals and achieve them. However, when it comes to self-discipline, I am actually not very self-disciplined. It's
Mm.
really hard for me to get up and self-discipline myself, and so I had to work out that dissonance. And the way I was able to work it out was kind of separate these two terms. Self-discipline has to do with internal focus, right? And when it comes to self-discipline, it's the ability to kind of be diligent and effectively achieve goals that the external world has no say in. Okay, so for example, if you and I said, okay, we want to get in shape and lose a little weight, right? We could decide to eat healthy. Okay, the external world has zero say in whether or not we decide we eat healthy. You and I can go to Vegas and we can go to the buffet, and that buffet is not telling us to eat
No.
the cupcakes and stuff. It's our decision, right? So self-discipline has to do with those things that the external world has no say in, and it's all about us. It's all on us. It's all about us. Discipline, on the other hand, has to do with those long-term goals or those goals that the external world has a say in. Okay, this is becoming a Navy SEAL. This is writing a book. This is becoming an executive, getting that raise. Becoming a great surgeon. Whatever that is, the external world actually has a say in whether or not you do that. You have to work through and fight through wickets that the external world has a say in. And so this is where we start talking about discipline in terms of an attribute. There are some people, and I certainly can think of people who I've experienced in my life who are extremely self-disciplined.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but when it comes to long-term goals and doing things like that, they can't do it. They don't get anywhere. Okay, there are other people who are very, very disciplined, but not very self-disciplined. Okay, we could put a lot of rock stars maybe in that category. So I mean,
Huh.
but so you can actually have one or the other. Now, again, the most effective, most high-performing individuals are both. Are the people who can and have both. But again, I mean, both can be worked on. I work on my self-discipline every day, so I can develop that. And then the discipline comes a little bit easier for me. But we can work on either one, or if you're lucky enough to have both, that's great too.
Yeah, I would never think to look at it that way, that they're separate, but it totally makes sense as you
Yeah,
explained it. That's really fascinating. I think discipline is probably one of the one things you need to be successful, to achieve anything in life. You have to be disciplined. And so
yeah,
I think more so self-discipline, but like you said, you need both. It makes total sense.
yeah.
Yeah, and you kind of touched on this, that personality traits. Well, what's interesting is attributes aren't talked about as often, and I think, like you said, because they're not seen, they're not easy to scale. But personality traits and attributes, what's the difference?
Yeah, that was another one I had to kind of reconcile. And when I looked at personality, and I kind of looked at like the ocean personality test and the descriptions and things like that. And what I really recognized is that I was I was really searching for the elemental things, like how finite can I get on this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And when it comes to personalities, the way I kind of reconciled it was it actually takes a little bit of time for a personality to emerge in a human being. And it's a combination of several things, a combination of certainly attributes, experience, environment, some genetics in there, a bunch of the values, beliefs, all of that start to shape someone's personality overall. And so the reason why I was able to separate is because personality traits kind of speak to all of that. Are there some attributes thrown in there? Absolutely, right? But I was really more concerned with, okay, what are the elemental things? Because I really, coming from an environment like the SEALs, I was really interested in why and how people behave at their most elemental, right? When things are like, when you're down to zero, like when you're in a hell week and things and experiences that I've had. Because a lot of us humans have those experiences. It doesn't have to be hell week or SEAL training. It could have been COVID. It could be cancer. It could be a divorce. It could be something that just knocks us down and takes us down to zero. The real us shows up, and what is that real us, right? And I was more interested in kind of exploring the more elemental things of the real us versus just the larger personality.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I think when it's just interesting that so many people focus on like values people has, the beliefs, and they don't go into depth as you have as you've studied to put this book together. I'm just curious, when you were in the SEAL training, were you thinking about writing this book? Was it like one of your goals, or
No,
did it just happen later?
it wasn't. I always loved writing. Even in college, I loved writing. So I'd always said to myself, it'd be cool to write a book. But it really wasn't until after I got out of the Navy, and I've been out now for 4 years, which is amazing. It seems like yesterday, but
Wow.
that I started realizing, and I started talking to businesses. I've been talking about leadership and high performing teams, and I'd constantly get people coming up and saying, "Hey, Rich, we had this dream team, right? We set up this dream team of people who had all the best stuff, right? And it turned toxic. I mean, things started happening, and the team just kind of ate each other alive. And they'd ask me, hey, why does that happen? And 9 times out of 10, in fact, I should say 10 times out of 10, because it pretty much every time I said, well, it's probably because you were picking your team based on the wrong criteria. You were picking your dream teams based on skill, and you weren't looking at attributes. And this is kind of what I call the dream team paradox. Because the dream team paradox is that dream teams are often picked based on skill and skill alone. And what that tells us is that team's going to be great when things are going great. But as soon as things stop going great, or some curveballs are thrown in that, which is, gosh, almost every time, right? It's really a test. The highest and best performing teams perform not only when things are great, but also when things are going really badly. And when things are going badly, that's when the team is leaning on its attributes, because they, as a team, are needing to figure out what's going on and problem solve and interact and kind of this human dynamic. The nature of human relationship is very dynamic and complex. It's just inherently uncertain, which means it's going to take attributes, not just skills, right? You and I can have great communication skills. We can listen, we can be able to talk and stuff. But when it comes to interacting with human beings in a myriad of environments, both bad and good, communication skills only go so far. Now you're going to have some of these more internal things that allow you to actually effectively work, and that's like humility, empathy, things like that that actually allow high performance.
hmm Actually, I remember listening to Jim Rome. He would say that, everybody could have the same skills. Like you could hire skills, right? That's,
Hmm.
as you talked about, it's seen. But what makes you make more than somebody else with the same skills, doing the same job or whatever, is how valuable you are. And I think value talks to the attributes.
Yeah, I agree. I
So,
agree.
so interesting, right? Uh, how do you bring more certainty to uncertainty?
Yeah, great. That's a
Like
great
for,
question. Yeah,
I mean, how I'm trying to simplify the
yeah,
question, but I think you know what I mean. It's like in this time of uncertainty, 2020, for example, or any time of uncertainty, how can we bring that certainty so we have more confidence and more grit, or develop those
yeah.
attributes that we need to persevere?
Yes. The simple answer, which I'll expound upon, is to control the controllables. Right? In the SEALs, you call it control your 3-foot world. Okay. Now, the question is, how do we do that? Well, in any environment of deep uncertainty, what we have to first be able to do is come down off of our fear response enough so that we can actually utilize our conscious mind effectively. Because our conscious mind is really going to be the part of our brain that is logically thinking through situations and environment versus the limbic part, which is kind of emotionally reacting. And this is actually where SEAL training also helps. You're designed to control your emotions in a way that you're constantly, even in the worst scenarios, thinking logically. You're never letting your fear
Hmm.
get overrun you. So you're able to bring yourself down and think through it. And once you're in that state where you are able to think through and in effect slow things down, it's about asking better questions. And so what's an interesting phenomenon is that neurologically we're designed to answer questions. That's what our brains do constantly. Our brains do that all the time to understand our environment. Usually it's done unconsciously, right? We're looking at, hey, there's a coffee cup. It's bouncing off of our hippocampus. By the time we're saying the word coffee cup, what's happened is it's bounced off our hippocampus and says, okay, I recognize that as a coffee cup. So it's asking questions, what is that? And it's trying to look in our catalog of things, whether or not we understand it. If we lodge a question into our frontal lobe, into our conscious mind, our brain has no choice but to begin to come up with answers. So I do an experiment with people, usually when I teach some of these classes and we talk about this concept. I say, okay, I'm going to give you 30 seconds. I want you to take out a piece of paper and a pen, and I want you to answer this question. How could I double my income in the next 6 months? Okay, I'm going to give you 30 seconds. Whatever pops into your head, write down, go. And I give them about 30 seconds. After that 30 seconds, we stop. And again, I say, hey, I don't care about the answers. That's not the point of the exercise. How many answers did you come up with? And typically the numbers are anywhere between 3 and 7, okay, answers that people wrote down. And I say, that's the point, okay? I just gave you a question out of nowhere, all right? And in 30 seconds, you started writing down answers. Well, our brains do this all the time. Now, oftentimes we do it, and we're not thinking about it, but we're asking ourselves the wrong questions. We're saying things like, why does this always happen to me? Why am I so bad at this? Why are these people out to get me? Okay, as soon as we lodge that question into our frontal lobe, our brain will start to give us answers, and we won't like the answers. They're not empowering, right? Every high performer I've ever experienced has understood this either consciously or unconsciously, and reframes, changes the questions, takes control of that, and asks a better one. Instead of why does this always happen to me? It's like, hey, what about this can I learn? What am I good at? Who around here are here to support me, right? You lodge those questions in your brain, you're going to come up with answers. And the key is to just kind of hack or take control of your own neurology, because asking a better question works. And I've done it since I was in high school. And I'm a big believer that the quality of our lives is directly proportional to the quality of questions we consistently ask ourselves. If we consistently ask ourselves better, more empowering questions, we're automatically to be focused on the right things. We're going to get the right answers. We're going to move forward instead of wallow and, in some cases, kind of downward spiral.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yes, absolutely. I agree. And what did you call it? The 3-foot, what did you say?
Oh, control your 3-foot world, right? So this all this speaks to is you take an environment of deep uncertainty and you start asking yourself the question, what about this do I understand? And then what about this can I control? Now, sometimes, depending on the situation, that might be literally I can control my next step. That's it. That's all I can control. But that's okay, because that's actually performing. And so one of the distinctions I make in the book is the difference between peak performance and optimal performance, which I think is important, because again, people would always ask me, hey, why, you SEALs, you're the top peak performers in the world. And I say, no, we're actually not. Because peak for me wasn't satisfactory enough. Peak is simply an apex. From which you can only come down. And oftentimes, peak has to be prepared for, planned for, and scheduled. The pro football player, for example, spends his entire week preparing and planning to peak for 3 hours on Sunday, okay? The business person can do the same thing if they have a presentation to give on a Wednesday. Well, that's when you're going to peak on that. What we are, as humans, certainly SEALs are optimal performance, okay? That is, how can I do the very best I can in the moment, whatever the best looks like, okay? And the best might look like peak. It might look like flow states and everything's clicking and everything's kind of cool and beautiful. But it also might look like, hey, I'm head down. I'm just taking step by step. That's all I got right now. It's the best I can do. And that's okay too. And I thought about myself in Hell Week and the freezing of the surf zone. I said, there was nothing peak about my performance at that point. There's so many times in combat I can think of, there was nothing peak about our performance in combat. We were literally just grinding it out. This is us in COVID, okay? I could guarantee that most of us listening to this right now can think back to those very first days of COVID and say, there was nothing peak about my performance in that moment, right? I was literally just grinding it out. And so what optimal performance allows us to do is put a much more realistic and healthier spin on our performance day to day, because it allows us that modulation. Optimal performance allows us to say, okay, what level of performance do I need right now? Because it might, I'm just driving to the grocery store. I don't need to peak, I can be normal, or you know what? I need to recover right now. I need to rest. I need to go down and not be anywhere near peak. I need to sit on the couch and take a nap. So optimal performance allows us to A, modulate, and B, also pat ourselves on the back for just taking that step by step. So sometimes that controlling your 3-foot world it's dirty, it's gritty, it's dark, it's ugly, it's miserable, okay? But you're still moving, and that's
Mhm.
optimal performance. And you're moving towards something you control. And once you get there, you're getting a dopamine hit because you just stepped into something that provided you fear and anxiety. So it's a kind of a boost to just take the next step.
Mm. Do you think that we should put ourselves more in uncertainty to help build certain attributes? Like, is there, I mean, I believe stepping outside our comfort zone, that's the only way to grow. So do
Mhm.
you believe we should put ourselves in certain situations so we could observe and have this introspection of like what is working for us or not working for us?
I think so. I think it's the best way to do it. Now, I'll caveat that to say, it doesn't have to be life threatening. Okay. I mean, you don't have to go skydiving just because
I
you're
like
afraid of heights, right?
skydiving.
Yeah. See, I don't. I don't like heights. So
No.
I did thousands of skydives and well, I didn't say everyone, but it was always a challenge for me. But that was me
Wow.
stepping out of my comfort zone. Whereas you put me underwater, pitch black with sea life teeming around me and I could fall asleep. I'm that comfortable, right? So,
Wow.
well, for some people it's like, no, I wouldn't want to do that at all. So we all have that, fear becomes very contextual and subjective, and so every person has to actually ask themselves, okay, what are those things that provide me discomfort and provide me some uncertainty, and start small. I mean, it could be, if someone's somewhat of an introvert, it could be walking up to someone in the grocery store they find attractive and starting a conversation. I mean, it could be as simple as that. And it might go well, it might not go well. But again, you were performing optimally if you tried, and you stepped into your fear. So good job, right? So yeah, I do think I agree with you. I think stepping outside our comfort zone, I kind of call it walking out to our edges, is key to growth, and it's also key to moving towards our potential. Because
True.
if you move towards one edge, as soon as you get to that edge, you get to see the next edge, right? The next horizon appears, and that's really growth in the end of the day for us as humans.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, for example, the cold water plunge or shower, bath,
Hmm.
whatever you call it, it's really to train our mind, like to show us what we're capable of. Because so many
Yeah,
people will say, there's no way I'll freeze to death, impossible. And then they do, and they're like, wow, okay, I can handle. I mean, it takes
yeah,
steps to do that, but it's so interesting. Like once we just step into that uncomfortableness, it will
yeah.
surprise ourselves because we're
Absolutely,
so
and you'll feel
capable.
great. You'll feel great having done it because
Totally.
you're getting juiced with dopamine because you're getting that reward for having done it.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's one of those things I think everybody should stop saying, "Oh, I can't do it. I'll freeze to death." It's like
Right.
impossible.
And just so you
We're
know, I have a chest freezer in my garage. I filled it with
amazing.
water, and it's at 32 degrees, and I usually get in at least 3 times a week just because I test myself
It's
that
so
way, and
amazing.
it's also very therapeutic too. There's some great therapeutic benefits too. But I agree with you. I think the chili dip is a great way to do it.
Yeah, I actually did a cold shower before this, and I remember saying to myself, "I don't feel like doing a cold shower today." But then I'm like, "I'm powerful, I'm capable, I'm strong." And
Yeah,
I actually said that when I was doing the shower because we are,
yeah,
it really
yeah.
just we're tricking our own self by saying we can't do something.
That's right.
Yeah. I think it was chapter 4, if I can recall, you said, be afraid of the fearless leader for
Hmm.
courage.
Yeah.
And I know, as you mentioned earlier, you talk about courage because courage is a very fascinating one. And I think we all need courage because I think what stops us, actually, not think, I know what stops us many times is fear of the
Hmm.
unknown, fear of failure. So we need to develop that courage attribute. So why do you say be afraid of the fearless leader?
Yeah, yeah. Beware. Yeah, it was a piece of advice I got from a senior officer. He said, "Beware the fearless leader because he'll likely get you killed." And the reason is because, like we kind of talked about, fear exists for a reason. Okay, our physiology starts to ramp up our autonomic nervous system and our amygdala because there's a threat, and that threat is at that point perceived as real. And by evolutionary design, we were designed to notice threats in our world
Mm,
to protect ourselves. This is exactly why bad news sells more than good news, okay? Because we're designed to notice threats before we notice good things. Because good things, we're like, okay, great, that's good. But well, wait a second, there's a bear, okay? That's the equivalent of bad news. We're noticing those bad things. When it comes to fear, we have to understand, kind of break it down. And again, one of the ways we can break it down is it actually breaks down into a combination of two things. Okay, fear is uncertainty plus anxiety. Okay, so uncertainty plus
mm,
anxiety equal fear. You can actually have one without the other, and fear does not exist, right? So you can be anxious but not uncertain. This is the person who might have a presentation next week they have to give. They're anxious about it, a little bit nervous, but they know when the presentation is going to be. They know who the crowd's going to be. They know what they're going to present, right? They're a little anxious. There's nothing uncertain about it, okay? So there's not really their fear there. You can be uncertain without being anxious, okay? Well, that's every kid on Christmas Eve, all right? So it's only when you combine the two that you begin to experience fear, okay? And then fear, and then we talked about how the amygdala ramps up and we can step into it. However, one of the ways that we can actually start to practice courage and practice stepping into our fear a little bit better is to understand the two elements of fear and then seek, well, inside of environments where they both exist, seek to buy down one or the other or both, right? So anxiety is all internal. It's a physiological response. Excuse me, heartbeat rises, all that stuff. So we can buy down our anxiety through very tangible physiological techniques. Breathing is a technique, and I know Mark Divine talks about breathing. But breathing will start helping shift from the sympathetic fear response to the parasympathetic. There are visual tools that you can use. For example, when we're in a fear state, we're deeply focused. Okay, our vision narrows and we start focusing only on the threat. Doing what's called an open gaze, where you kind of bring your vision out and you stop staring at something and you start noticing your peripheries. That's open gaze. That actually has been proven to start shifting you from sympathetic to parasympathetic. So you can start buying it down that way. You can also, certain visualization techniques help. I mean, music. There's some people who use music to help them kind of calm down and relax. So that's some of the ways you can buy down that anxiety. Uncertainty is a little bit more difficult because uncertainty deals with the external world, okay? But we just talked about that. To buy down the uncertainty is just start asking yourself, okay, what about this uncertainty can I control? And then you start taking control of the chunks that you can and then moving through and stepping through that way. So you can buy down one or the other to start kind of buying down some fear and then hopefully begin to start marching more into courage, in whatever that endeavor might be. I mean, an example, kind of a real world example that we might all relate to is if you have to give a talk in front of a bunch of people and you're really nervous, you're more than just nervous, you're fearful, right? And you're anxious because, you don't know how it's going to go. You're not sure. You're uncertain about how the crowd. So there's anxiety plus uncertainty. Well, a lot of that anxiousness can be managed just through physiological tools. And then the uncertainty, when you start to break down the uncertainty of that specific event, you recognize that a lot of it's just kind of fantasy, right? You're projecting what you think the crowd might think, which is just nonsense, to be honest with you. And so you can begin to say, okay, what can I control in this environment? Well, I can control myself being rehearsed. I can control where my hands go. I can control having knowledge of the material. This is why some people say, hey, stare at someone in the audience, right? I always, for me, because I didn't like public speaking either, by the way. And when I got out of the Navy, I said, well, that's an edge I want to conquer. And so I would always key in on the one or two people that were really responding positively to what I was saying. The people who just always smiling or laughing or nodding. It's like, okay, I'm looking at that person as much as I possibly can because that's giving me good feedback. So there's ways you can do that. But again, it becomes contextual and subjective to whatever you're trying to step into. But those are some of the ways you can do it.
Yeah. Okay, so talking about your book, because there's so much goodness in it, and I think I love how you lay it out too. I forgot all the titles you put for each attribute, but it's really creative. What are some of them? Like, some of them are frog. I don't know. Just
beware. Be the frog. Be the frog, not the dinosaur. That was my favorite part, by the way. Was naming the chapters.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
But how could somebody best utilize your book to strengthen certain attributes so that they could get to where they want to go, or just handle things better, especially uncertain times?
Yeah, well, so I wrote the book so that the book is very much for the reader. I didn't want to write a book about Navy SEALs or or high performers or anything like that. I really wanted to write a book that was about the reader. And so if someone reads the book, they will be able to kind of get some concepts up front. But then as they read about each attribute, they can actually absorb that and say, okay, how does that fit for me? I mean, how am I on my, pick an attribute, my perseverance, or how am I on my compartmentalization? And really kind of think about that internally. This book is hopefully going to prompt some introspection for the reader. And I would offer and I would encourage those who read it to do that, to read it and really think about how it applies to them. I also offer an assessment on the website.
Oh, you do?
And
Okay.
yeah, on the website at theattributes.com, you can go and you can take a grit assessment, a mental acuity assessment, and a drive assessment, and it's for free. And what you can do is you'll get a score back on how you fall on each of these attributes. Now, the only caveat to that is when we put that together, we basically set it up and pushed it out to about 1,000 people worldwide and got data back. So the score you get is going to be your level of, say, adaptability as compared to 1,000 people. Okay, it's not, it's really just a snapshot. It's not really, it might not be you, right? What I'm encouraging people to do is once they take that, they read the book, they take the assessment, and then they take that score and they say, okay, how does that fit for me? And what does that mean for me? Is that accurate? And they really have to kind of think about and walk back into their history and say, okay, when I think about some different situations in different contexts, overall, can I say I'm pretty adaptable? And yeah, that score actually makes sense. Or no, that score doesn't make a lot of sense. I'm actually not as adaptable that I need to. Ultimately, if the whole process forces someone to really think about their own attributes, then mission accomplished as far as I'm concerned. Yeah.
Yeah. And actually at the end of the book, what I loved is you actually included values. And I'm curious,
Yes.
Why did you do that?
Well, I did because values can start to give us windows into some of our attributes. What we value can give us a little bit of a clue. Now, not all of them, but certainly some of them, right? Competitiveness is a great example. And I talk about competitiveness in the book as a bi-directional. In other words, to be competitive or non-competitive, both are actually very, very good. I mean, there are high performers with both of those qualities. So I couldn't bin it because most of the other attributes, at least in the categories, for the most part, having a little bit more is better, right? Other than when you get into something like narcissism or things like that. But for the most part, having some more, it's better to be more adaptable than have no adaptability, right? Mm-hmm. It was different for things like competitiveness and non-competitiveness, and then patience and impatience. And so competitiveness is a great example. If you value competition, okay, if that's one of your values, you're likely a competitive person. Okay, so that speaks to where you stand on that attribute. And so if you value empathy, you likely have high levels of empathy. Same thing with authenticity. So some of these attributes can show up in what you value. So I add a values exercise in the book so that someone can kind of go through that, get a sense of their values, and that hopefully can give them some clues into their attributes.
Gotcha. Well, I'll definitely include the link to your assessment in the show notes. That's for sure. So just out of curiosity for you, what attributes do you feel you are not as strong in? What are your strongest attributes?
Yeah. I'm pretty high on the grit ones, obviously, because I did what I did. When it comes to the mental acuity ones, I'm high on situation awareness. I'm pretty good on compartmentalization. I'm okay at task switching, and I would say the lowest one I'm on is learnability. So in other words, learnability, it takes me a while to kind of absorb something. I have to do it a couple times. It takes some repeat. We all know those people, and you might be one, but
I am.
But you're told something once and you got it right. I mean, you pick it up. It's very fast, very easy. And I'm just not like that, So I usually, it takes me a while. I sometimes make the same mistake twice, and so I'm a little lower on learnability. The drive ones, I think I balanced discipline. We already talked about how I'm pretty disciplined overall, but I have horrible self-discipline. I've worked on my empathy since getting out of the military because I felt like, and my wife helps me with that because she's one of the most empathetic people I know. And so just trying to get myself to be and feel what other people feel has been something I worked on. And again, it's better, as a SEAL, you don't need a lot. In fact, too much could probably be detrimental.
I was gonna say, yeah.
Yeah. So getting out has afforded me the ability to kind of work on that. And yeah, I think that's probably, I mean, humor is one of my favorites, and I think I've always been high on humor, but so that could be valuable both in the SEAL teams and anywhere else too. So.
And do you feel surrounding yourself with people could also build your certain attributes as well?
Yeah, for certain. And that's another, I realized that I've designed my life to consistently surround myself with people who I felt like were way better than me. Like I literally look around and be like, oh my gosh, I really have to like up my game right now. And I felt that way constantly throughout my career. And every time I did, I felt excited. And even getting out of the Navy, I was around people who were speaking on leadership who were like, oh my God, these people are so much better at this. I was around authors who were so much better. So so that helps you really refine and develop, because you're throwing yourself into an environment and you're challenging yourself, which is important.
Yeah. Oh gosh. Actually, to go full circle, since we were talking about the SEAL teams and going through Hell Week, did you ever consider quitting? Did you ever consider ringing the bell?
No, I didn't. At least I don't remember
Mhm.
considering it. But I can be pretty confident to say that I never did, because honestly, when someone considers that, it's the start of what often becomes a downward
Quitting.
spiral.
Mm.
Because what happens is when you consider other options like that, when you consider an option, it becomes a possibility. And as soon as something's a possibility, it's either dangerous or empowering. In
Yeah.
the SEAL training sense, it's dangerous, because you're like, oh wait, that is a possibility, and your brain might start to go down that road. So I don't remember ever thinking it. So I don't think I did.
Yeah. I would think so, that it's kind of like you're already geared towards quitting if you even think of it
Yeah,
for a second, I would
yeah.
think. And I know I've heard people talk about, or especially SEALs, is these micro goals and accomplishing little tasks to get to your
Mhm.
big task. Was that something that you would say was a common thing in SEAL training?
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. In fact, that's just another way of saying control your 3 foot world. I mean,
Oh, okay.
that's basically let's pick something that I can move towards, this little
Hmm.
goal, and move towards it. And that could be as simple as get through the next minute, or get to the next meal,
Hmm.
or complete this dive, whatever it is. But this is how you can effectively move through life as well. I mean, and in fact, I would guess that most people in the beginnings of the throes of COVID were doing that. At least the ones that were able to eventually kind of survive and thrive, they were either consciously or unconsciously picking small things. I'm just going to make it to dinner tonight, or I'm just going to make
Yeah.
it to bed, or I'm going to whatever. I'm going to take this walk or whatever. It's a very powerful exercise.
I agree.
A, because it helps you step through, but B, you're also creating a reward system, because every time you do that, you're getting another dopamine hit, and it feels good, and you are encouraged to do it again. So that's absolutely what goes on.
Yeah, I think it's so empowering. First of all, controlling your controllables, and
Hmm.
then accomplishing little micro goals or
Yeah,
tasks
right.
to get to your bigger audacious goal. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
So if you were to leave, I know there's Richard, there's so much in your book, and I want people to read your book because I mean, we touched on just, or you touched on just a little bit of it, but there's so much. There's 25 attributes, but actually, is there more than 25, would you say? Or
I would say, yeah, I would say I laid out 25, but there are a lot more than 25. So I just picked the ones that I thought would be
most
the
important?
best for optimal performance and most fun to
Yeah.
talk about.
Well, of course, I want people to get your book. Where could they best find your book? Is it out in bookstores,
Yeah.
Amazon, everywhere?
Yeah, everywhere books are sold, but
Yeah.
they also can go to the website, theattributes.com, and you can get it there. You can take the assessment. There's a blog there. I put some articles, and then I also just threw up some workbooks on the site, because the next question I always got was, hey, how do I develop this attribute?
Yeah.
Whatever it is. And so I said, okay, well, I should probably design some workbooks. So I designed a workbook for grit, mental acuity, and drive. It
Amazing.
goes through each attribute and gives you tips on how to develop that attribute. So if
I
people are
love that.
interested in that, they can find that as well.
Perfect. I'll include that all in the show notes. And if you were to just leave one piece of advice, something you have not dropped, any nugget you have for us to help us succeed in life, basically.
Yeah. Um, One nugget. I mean, we've talked about so much.
I know.
Oh well, so
Just
here's what
life
I'll say.
advice.
Yeah, I'd say gratitude. Okay, I'm someone who I could describe myself as always being grateful but never being satisfied. Okay, and
Mm,
that means I'm constantly looking around me and just being very grateful for everything I have, and my family and my house and everything I've done, and the fact that I'm still here after years in combat.
yeah.
And that really is a very powerful, true gratitude is a very, very powerful emotion, and actually gives us some of the most condensed sets of neurotransmitters and hormones, that no other emotion does. It's one of the most powerful emotions when it comes to positive neurotransmitters and hormones, if it's genuine gratitude. So I think
Yeah.
I think asking ourselves a better question, like what am I grateful for, and really truly thinking through that and emotionally feeling it. I tell you, there's no greater gift, and it can help someone who's in the lowest points, I think, make it through.
So valuable. So valuable. Thank you so much, Reg. This has been an honor. I am so grateful for your time. And like I said, I haven't fully gone through your book, but I'm definitely going to dedicate some good time to it because I think it's really fascinating and it helps you evaluate who you are and what your strengths are. And I think we could all improve. Growing is life. So it's a perfect growth book.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that, and I appreciate the opportunity. Thanks so much for having me. I'm honored to be
Yeah.
here. So.